I just want to welcome everyone to our 15th episode of Happy Hour with David and Chip. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, want to let you know who David and Chip are. Chip Conley is the founder of Modern Elder Academy in sunny Baja, Mexico. It's a midlife wisdom school. And David Stewart, who is the founder and face of Ageist, a global media platform shining a light on a new mindset and way of living for the hip and cool 40 plus crowd. And tonight with us, we have a super special guest. Excited to announce Danny Meyer is with us. And I just personally want to thank you for opening up Shake Shack. That saved me with my young ones in Connecticut. So thank you. And I'm going to hand it off to Chip.
All right. Well, first of all, let's do a little happy hour toast. It's an early happy hour so for those of you who've made it early, look at her. She's got her red wine already. Laura, look at you. I'm doing water today. So for those of us on Pacific time, and for those of you on the East Coast, let's do a sip. So welcome everybody. We're going to talk about food and wine and everything in between, and why a lot of people in the wine business are whining these days. Let's do a little check-in, David, with you and me. How are you? I think you just bought a home. Is that right? Yes.
Well, we've been essentially not homeless. We've been nomadic since last March, and although that sounds like really romantic and fun, there needs to be an end. And I want my books and I want my stuff and I need to play. I don't have a mailbox. I haven't had a mailbox since March. And if you engage with things like the credit card companies and car insurance, that makes them very nervous. So yeah, we got a place here. So we're going to Utah residents, and we'll be here for at least another probably year.
Well, soon enough you will actually be voting in Utah, but instead you're actually flying to LA to vote. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, I don't have a mailbox, so it's a problem with the mail-in ballot. You don't get it. So my wife and I are actually flying to Los Angeles tomorrow, and we will vote in early voting tomorrow in Los Angeles. And I was not going to sit this one. If you want, sometime, Chip, I'll tell you the story of I was in Miami Beach in the 2000 election. I was in Miami Beach. And I was one of the people that was disenfranchised. And the stuff that you read in the news is nothing compared to what really went on. And so, yeah, I'm all in.
I always wanted to create a pub in Miami called the Hanging Chad. But other than that, it sounds a little gross and maybe, maudlin, but
I like it.
Well, I'll do a quick check-in. I have a new book idea. I was going to call it Collective Effervescence, but I have a new literary agent, and he says, "No, Chip, you need to call it Why We Gather." Why We Gather. So, I think this is particularly important, like considering the subject of today, or tonight, our happy hour. What's so interesting, I love reading the history of gathering. I've been always fascinated by it, fascinated by festivals as well. But it's so interesting because there's almost like a reclaiming of humanity that needs to be done. And this premise of collective effervescence, which comes from a guy named Emil Durkheim, who studied religious pilgrimages from 110 years ago, is the idea that somehow when we are in a beautiful space connecting in an awe-filled way with other people, you lose track of yourself, which is actually a good thing. And you feel that sense of communal joy. And that is something we're desperately missing these days, wouldn't you say?
Have you ever been to a Bruce Springsteen show?
Yes.
Like, there you go, right?
And that profile that in the Atlantic by David Brooks, I think it is.
David Brooks one, yeah.
You profiled it in today's Ageist. Yeah. It's a great, for those of you who have not read the profile on Bruce Springsteen, you can go to Ageist and find it there, or at the Atlantic magazine. So yeah, the boss still has it.
Well, I mean, that is a collective effervescence. That is as much of a religious experience as you're probably ever going to have in your life.
Yeah, and a little hint, 2 weeks from now is our next happy hour. We have a famous award-winning musician joining us who's going to talk about what is it like to experience collective effervescence on stage when you have tens of thousands of people watching you. We'll get to that, and we'll give you a little hint at the end who that might be. But let's go to Danny, because we have a headliner here. This is like, you're no warm-up act, Danny. People are excited to have you here, so we want to get into the conversation with you as soon as possible. So let me do a little intro and then just tell people a little bit about why I'm such a fan. And we have a bit of a mutual admiration society that we've had for a while. So let's see, those of you who don't, I'm going to say this very briefly because most of you already know it. The warmth master is the way to describe Danny, because anybody who comes into contact with Danny feels warmer and appreciated. And it's sort of that, oh my gosh, a Maya Angelou quote about, you don't remember what a person said, but you remember the way they made you feel. And Danny's Enlightened Hospitality and his well-known book, Setting the Table, speaks to the idea of hospitality and its value, not just in the restaurant business, but in the world. And in fact, he started a company that actually is dedicated to actually helping others, the Union Square Hospitality Group, incorporate hospitality into their operations. I will tell you, Danny, that one of the things that Brian Chesky at Airbnb does is he quotes me occasionally, and sometimes he quotes me as I've quoted someone else. And he particularly appreciates a quote that's from you, but that I said that I always attribute to you, but Brian always brings it up, and he says, hospitality is not when someone's doing something to you, it's when someone's doing something for you. So let's welcome Danny Meyer, one of probably America's best known restaurateur, after creating a collection of beloved neighborhood restaurants in New York that have won all kinds of awards. He co-created with a group of people, Shake Shack, that's been a very successful brand and franchise. It's not franchise, but a brand throughout the US and maybe beyond. I don't even know. But Danny, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Chip, and also David. And I'm glad to be with all of you guys tonight. By the way, Chip, I wanted to share, there's a terrific book that I read about 2 years ago or so. It came out called The Art of Gathering. And
Priya Parker, she's a friend.
So you know it. All right, cool.
Oh, yeah.
And, with David, to your point about collective effervescence and hospitality, if you go to a Bruce Springsteen concert, he actually understands hospitality as well as any restaurateur. He is playing for your pleasure. He's not like so many other musicians who are playing to prove how amazing they are. Like, you'll go to a jazz concert sometimes and the tenor sax player wants you to know how many notes he or she can bend to show you what they know how to do, but it's what can they do for you. And at a Springsteen concert, he's as good as any maitre d' or any restaurateur or any chef, only he just makes us happy with his music. But one last thing, I really love the expression collective effervescence, because being a sports fan, and I'm primarily a St. Louis Cardinals fan because that's where I grew up, but I love baseball, and I really had a problem during the postseason with almost no one in the crowd, in the audience, because for me it's those crowd shots of people biting their nails in the ninth inning, and just like, what's going to happen next? And it's the human spectator watching this thing that's at least as exciting for me, the tension, as what's happening on the field itself, and that was just missing. Yes. So we're doing the best we can in New York City. We have a capacity limit as of today of 25% indoors, and what that also means is it's 75% empty. Yeah. And we cook for your pleasure, and we cook for the for the sense of community that a restaurant creates with full dining rooms and the glasses clinking and the silverware clanging and the smells and the sounds. And it's really hard to take gathering out of our repertoire, or the ability to really gather people the way we like to. It's hard.
Well, and the math is hard. I mean,
Oh yeah, that.
the restaurant business is a nickel and dime business, and having a 25% capacity limit, you might as well not open.
Well, we'd be thrilled with pennies right now.
Tell us, I mean, give us an overall view of the restaurant industry in the United States right now in terms of where it is, what's going on. And then I'm going to pass it on to David to ask some more questions. But
yeah, I wish I could be, I am hopeful, but I'll start with some reality before I get to the hope. The reality is that there are some 600,000 plus restaurants in America. And why is that important? Well, we employ over 20 million people. That makes restaurants the largest employer in the country outside of government, but no one knows that. If you look at the industry as a whole, it's really easy to get our arms around the auto industry or the airline industry, and we understand why they should be saved and should actually get some governmental support. But we don't really understand restaurants because they're so diffuse. They're in every community in the country. They play a role not only in the massive role in the economy of our country in terms of employment, in terms of purchasing, but they also play an amazingly important role in the emotional well-being of our country. I mean, I love that you asked the listeners today to name your favorite restaurants, and I took a peek, and a lot of them happen to be my favorite restaurants as well that are on your list here. But think about the memories that are created in restaurants and just the time that we have to restore ourselves, which is what the word restaurant means. And that's gone away right now. That's taken out of our hands. And we want to be part of the healing of this country right now. We did that in New York after 9/11 by bringing people together to feel better, but that's been taken out of our hands because it's not safe to do so right now. So the reality is we've got to look at the reality that we're going to lose a lot of our favorite restaurants. It's going to be a tough, very, very tough winter. We didn't get the relief we needed from policymakers in Washington. And so there's a lot of restaurateurs who are going to be facing a tough choice about handing back the keys to the landlord who's now not maybe been paid for many, many months. Landlords don't know what to do because they owe money in some cases to their lenders. So it's going to be a tough road ahead. The hope I have is this, that I know restaurateurs really, really well. I know chefs really, really well. And none of us got into this business because it was easy. We got into this business because we love making people feel better. And we'll be damned if anything's going to stop us from doing that. So even if a whole bunch of leaves fall off our trees in the coming months, I just know that there's going to be new ones to take their place. And, I feel bad for people who owe all kinds of money and rent. We certainly do in many of our places. And I feel bad for so many people who have been laid off from their jobs. We've had to face that, and it's been really, really hard. But I have a lot of hope that Americans love going out to eat, and they're not going to stop doing that. The last thing I'll say is, if you go to New York right now, you can actually see this in play, because even though we're only able to serve with 25% capacity indoors, look at the shanty towns that have popped up on every sidewalk in the city of restaurants that'll be damned if they're not going to find a way to serve food. We have heaters outside with 40-degree weather, and the New Yorkers will be damned if they're not going to come patronize their favorite place. And we're making blankets and heaters, and they literally look like shanty towns. But that's because we're irrepressible, and we will come back.
Wow. I love that. I love that spirit, Danny. I lived in New York for 25 years, and I got a 917 phone. I'm not giving it up. Your book, Setting the Table, is it's one of my favorite books. If you work at Ageist, you must read that book. And my feeling is, if you are in any business that deals with a customer, you need to read that book. It's like a Bible. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was advice that I give people is, similar to what you were saying about Bruce, like being a host. But by being a host, what it does is it takes me from not thinking about me and how uncomfortable and awkward I feel, and more about you and how can I make you feel happy. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about like hospitality, sort of small H, like being hospitable in ordinary life. Do you have any advice about that?
Well, yes, I do. I really don't like giving advice, and I'm grateful for what you said about setting the table. If you read Setting the Table carefully, you will see that there's no advice given. It's really just making observations about stuff that has either worked or not worked. And I want to say one of the greatest gifts of Setting the Table is that's how I met Chip Conley, because I was on my book tour in San Francisco, and somehow I think you had just written one of your great masterpieces. I've only written one. And we were in the same TV studio or something like that to get at the same time. But anyway, we'll get back to that later. Am I right-ish?
Yes, you're right on this, right on the nose.
Okay. But what I would say about hospitality is, at its essence, it's something that exists if the person on the receiving end of it, and I really appreciate how you put that, David, it's about someone else, but the person on the receiving end feels like you're on their side. So if you think about every transaction you have in life, whether you're buying a cup of coffee or calling the repair person to get something fixed, or asking your flight attendant for whatever kind of beverage you want, the only question you have to ask is not, did they do the thing I asked them to do, but did they do it in a way that made me feel like they're on my side? So that's hospitality. And what it stems from, in my opinion, is a deep-seated human desire to belong. It's like, why do we care about hospitality? Why do we want to receive it? Why do we want to give it? On one hand, I feel like it's an emotional word for the giving and receiving of a hug, because most people who are great at giving hugs really need hugs, because you can't give one and not get one back unless you're hugging a tree or something like that. But I do think that at the end of the day, why do people want a job? They want to belong to that community of people who work there. Why do people have a favorite restaurant? Well, as James Beard famously said, when everybody would ask him, what's your favorite restaurant? He would say, it's the same as yours. And they'd go, what? And he'd say, yeah, my favorite restaurant is the one that loves me the most. What's your favorite restaurant? And they were dumbfounded, because at the end of the day, people, they want to belong. If I promise you, if you put down on the chat here someplace that's your favorite restaurant, it's the one that made you feel like you belong the most. And that's hospitality when that happens. Now, one last thing. I've learned about myself that as someone who spent really the first 2/3 of my career in the dining rooms at the front door, chatting with guests at their table side, and really like, Mr. Hospitality. I find that if I'm in a party setting, I become an introvert. And so I've completely different kind of thing. And I've learned a great word that describes not just me, but a lot of people, which is being a flextrovert, which is that there are situations in which I am actually very extroverted. And there are many situations in which I completely turn into an introvert. And so I think that I've learned that many of us are not purely one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. On the subject of hospitality, and you started a company to actually help scale the concept of hospitality to a larger audience, often within the service industry. Maybe you can characterize what's the difference between the service industry or service versus hospitality, and what are some industries that you have introduced hospitality to that desperately needed it without having to necessarily tell us the company that you did, because I don't want to get any companies in trouble. But let's
Oh, who's going to get in trouble for more hospitality?
Well, let's dish on which industries desperately could use some hospitality.
Right.
But tell us the difference between
yeah.
service and hospitality, and which industries you've been helping.
Well, we used to have a company that was a consulting company called Hospitality Quotient, and we've since given up getting into the consulting business per se, because we're kind of stick to our knitting, but we still welcome people, at least pre-pandemic, and maybe we'll get back to this with some Zoom business, but for a 3-day course, which we do several times a year, called Creating Raves. And the kind of businesses that take it are primarily not in the restaurant or hotel business. So one of the big mistakes is looking at hospitality either as restaurants, hotels, or what you get when you go to mom's house for Thanksgiving, right? Hospitality is a powerful business dynamic that every business needs, every organization needs today. Why? Because the minute we got the internet, we all learned how to be serial plagiarists. And so in the old days, service, which is how well you do the thing you do, it's the technical delivery of the product, was good enough to be a defining factor in your success as a business. You do the thing better than the other guy does, therefore you have better service. You do it quicker, better, more reliably, you have better service. Well, once we got search engines and the internet, as soon as the word gets out that someone does something really well, it's really easy to copy that and do it just as well. So therefore, what that leaves is, oh, and by the way, how did you make people feel while you were doing that? And that's called hospitality. And it's the businesses that make their employees feel better that have a big edge. It's the businesses that make their customers feel better. That's a big edge. It's the businesses that make the communities in which they do business feel even better. That's a massive edge. So, we think about that all the time. And to answer your question, we had everything from retailers, clothing retailers, law firms, insurance companies, veterinarian companies, airlines. One of the major airlines in this country worked with us for their first class service. One of the companies that I'm actually proud to name the company, because I love using it, is a company that's in airports that moves people through security much faster than TSA does, and has employed hospitality as part of what they do. That's a company called Clear. And they were one of our first clients. And in fact, when we disbanded our consulting business, they recruited one of our lead consultants who's now in charge of their employee experience there. So it's everywhere. It's banks.
How about hospitals?
Hospitals, I'm sorry I didn't mention that, because healthcare was our top category when we had Hospitality Quotient. Imagine the word hospital lives within the word hospitality, and yet that's one of the places that for years and years and years was more focused on the metrics about getting you better, but wasn't thinking about how to make you feel better.
Wow. Wow. Well, I know some hospitals that could use you. So I want to ask you, Danny, your business is particularly challenged. And I know that would mean you personally have a lot of stuff coming on you. Tell me about, how do you stay centered? What's your personal support network? How do you manage yourself during the day to keep your stress down?
Probably the same way everybody else tries to. And it certainly is not a work-life balance. That's BS, and that never worked. in my life, it never worked because I was never giving enough to work and I was never giving enough to my family or my personal life. So that's just like recipe to be unhappy. What I did learn, and I think about this very, very consciously, is the more relevant balance is a four-way balance between taking care of my body, my mind, my spirit, and my heart. And when I'm out of balance, which certainly is real easy to get at this time, I just look at those quadrants and I say, well, which one or which ones is it? I'm doing the best I can to get lots and lots of exercise. I'm doing the best I can to hug the people I'm allowed to hug. And if I can't hug them, that doesn't mean I can't laugh with colleagues as we're trying to solve hard problems, but I can love my colleagues and hopefully get that love back. I get lots and lots of spiritual nourishment from being in nature. And because I feel like spirituality is the human quest to understand that which is not understandable. Like, why did that wind happen? Why does that tree bloom this way? Why does that flower so gorgeous? Why, why are the waves so big? And I'm not just talking about climate change. I'm just talking about nature as it is, really feeds my spirit. Why does that bird sing differently than that bird? And my mind, that's a tough one because sometimes feeding my mind is getting stuff off my mind. Sometimes feeding my mind is learning more about something that I'm curious about. So that's what I'm trying to really lean into is because this takes a lot out of you. It so much about this pandemic has been counterintuitive because everything that I was always taught, and I failed a lot in school, but I was taught it. And everything I was taught in business was that if you really, really apply hard work and you really apply learning and you get a little bit of luck thrown in, you can probably make some progress with a lot of things. And in this case, it's like some days it doesn't matter how hard I work or how many good decisions I think I made. It's just like you can't outrace this virus. You just can't. And you just kind of have to watch as the goalpost keeps changing, all the time. And as a leader, trying to be as communicative and empathetic and humble with your team as possible and constantly balance reality and hope and just be transparent.
It's a perfect segue to the question, Danny, of how are you a different leader today than you were, say, 20 years ago? One of the things that our audience, both at Ageist and Meyer, are intrigued by is how do we value wisdom? How do we shift our mindset on aging? And how do we, frankly, value our insight and perspective in midlife and beyond? So how personalize that to you? Like, what defines you as a leader today that might be different than how you were, let's say, for 9/11 20 years ago? Forget about the circumstances of these two, external events, but think about how you show up as a leader differently today than you would have 20 years ago.
I feel like that's a really good and hard question. I want to just remind myself and you at the same time that we don't have nearly as much business right now as we had on March the 13th or 14th, when we closed all of our businesses and had zero revenue until we were finally able to open just 3 of them. And to put that in perspective, I think we had something like 20 restaurants. And I'm not talking about Shake Shack, that's separate. And Shake Shack never closed, believe it or not. There's 300 in the world right now. But for a full service restaurant, we're down to a very, very small percentage. We're growing a little bit each day, but I think as a leader at the 9/11 time, I was still like spending time in every restaurant every day and showing up and seeing the team and seeing our guests. And right now it seems to me that a bigger part of my job is expected to be outward facing, trying to be a leader for our industry, trying to be a leader for policy change at the city level, state level, and federal level, which is something I really wasn't thinking about in 2011. And I also feel that the biggest, if I were going to say one thing, it would be this, that that earlier part of my career, I felt like I was responsible for having all the answers. And today, I know I don't have any of the answers because I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like. And so I felt like when I would hear a question from someone, not only did I feel like I had to have the answer, but I felt like I had to respond. And today I feel like I need to listen, not for the purpose of having the answer, not for the purpose of responding, but for the purpose of understanding. And the more I can listen to understand, the more I can then get a feeling for how the people in our organization need to be fed if they're going to do the things that our operators are asking them to do. So I'm much less operationally focused and much more about how does it feel to work in our organization. And the last thing I'll say about that is, and I think David touched on this a little bit earlier, I'm really, really taken these days with how do you scale culture? How do you scale a feeling? So in our food industry, I think it can be said that no one did a better job, more effective job of scaling the product technique than Ray Kroc at McDonald's. The French fries are going to taste exactly the same way. The burger is going to taste exactly the same way, whether you have it in Moscow or Malibu or wherever they are. Okay. In my case, I obviously want the food product to be consistently good, but I'm much, much more interested in can you scale the way you make people feel? I don't think that's probably something Ray Kroc thought a whole lot about, and good for him. He certainly was an enormous success. But I love thinking about how do you take a human organization and get everyone to understand why we exist as a business, hire the kind of people for whom that matters, and then set them free to go do it.
Wow, thank you. David, I'm going to let you ask the last question, and then we're going to open it up for the audience questions.
I need to get a kind of a range of a quote on something.
Oops. Actually,
are you the person to help me with that?
Okay. I'm going to.
I've got a 2-bedroom house in Foster City going to Palm Springs area. Okay.
Love Zoom.
It's not a
Who
huge
is that?
stuff. I mean, you got 2 beds, king size and a queen, a desk,
Michael,
chairs,
David.
a dinette set, 4 chairs.
Hey, Michael, mute.
Lounges.
Michael, actually.
Living room couch.
I'm trying to mute him, sorry.
Family room.
Can you actually delete
sofa
him?
And love
I
seat.
can do
So
that too.
3 couches,
Yeah.
2 couches and a
Michael
seat.
Louie.
2 side chairs for a living room.
Oh,
3 side
no.
chairs, 2 coffee tables, 3 coffee tables, 2 side tables. There's really no one credenza.
This has never happened.
70 inches long.
Okay, so
2 buffets that are sort of like.
there you go. All right.
There we go.
That is a very strange thing that just happened. Okay.
So charming to hear about your home.
This is why we gather. This is why we need to do these things in person occasionally because of.
Can I just say something? Let's hope that's the worst thing that happens all year.
Yes, exactly. Could have been a lot worse. That's true. So we're going to open it up for questions from the audience in a moment, but I'm going to let David have the last question.
I just want to, so I went to Shake Shack in Salt Lake City, which was great, right? And tell me, my understanding was this Shake Shack came because it was like a way to raise money for Madison Square Park. And then somehow it went from this sort of like that to this. How did you imagine, no, right? How did that happen?
No, it's a fun story, and it's one of the best mistakes I'll ever make in my entire life, or accidents, I should say. And that is that we were when we had opened two restaurants overlooking Madison Square Park, 11 Madison Park and Tabla, all the way back in 1998. The vision that I had was that these restaurants would help to restore a park that was forlorn and forgotten. And one of the visions was that once you restore it and make it beautiful, horticulture, et cetera, you got to give people a reason to use it. And we always thought that art would be a reason for people to come to the park. And it so happened that the organization that curated a piece of art from an artist from Thailand, who wasn't my idea at all. He had 4 taxi cabs on stilts, and he designed a hot dog cart, and his art was called I Love Taxi. And they needed somebody to cook the hot dogs for the hot dog cart. And this was when I was really starting to think much more intentionally about hospitality. And I said, I'm so tired of people saying hospitality is only for fancy restaurants. I want to see if we can actually distinguish a hot dog cart. And so, of course, we're going to do Chicago style hot dogs because they have 8 toppings. And I wanted to see if we could remember everybody's favorite. What I didn't know is there would be 100 people a day lined up for these hot dogs. This was in the summer of 2001. And it went so well that even when the art came down for the next summer, the city needed some cheering up. It was the first summer after 9/11. And they said, just bring back the hot dog cart, take the art off the side of it, just give us our hot dog cart. So we did that 2001, 2002, 2003. For 2004, we said, let's contribute this kiosk to Madison Square Park. We'll give it as a gift. The park can become our landlord. So they'll get a percentage of every sale. We'll get the business. I have no idea that anyone would want to go there. And I just wrote on a piece of paper one day, in addition to the hot dogs, what are the other things we should have on the menu? I didn't invent any of this stuff. Cheeseburgers, crinkle cut fries, milkshakes, frozen custard. And lo and behold, the line would just go on forever. And we had no interest or intention to have a second one. We just wanted a place that would make the park safe and raise some money for the park. And it was 5 years before we had a second Shake Shack. So it wasn't until 2008, 2009 that we had a second Shake Shack. And here we are with 300 of them with a public company. And the best part of this is the original Shake Shack did what it's supposed to do pre-pandemic. That one Shake Shack in Madison Square Park was contributing almost $1 million in rent right to that park to keep it safe. So it's a great business model. You should try it sometime.
You know what? I would call that a spectacular example of karmic capitalism. What goes around comes around. So, the fact that you were good-hearted in what you wanted to do there, and it came back to support the neighborhood and
well, you're right, Chip. And I had actually gotten the idea from a book by Billy Shore, a fantastic book, which is still in print, called The Cathedral Within. And his notion was that most of us are motivated by things much greater than ourselves. The cathedral builders would never survive to see their work completed because these things took 200-300 years in the case of some of the great cathedrals. And he had this concept in this book called community wealth, creating community wealth, which was basically saying that you'll never be able to outspend problems in society with philanthropy or with governmental help, but capitalism does survive. And if you could use capitalism as a model to build community wealth, it can actually perpetuate and grow some of the best things. That's why I did this. I wanted to put that to the test. And it's another example of, a quote from Man's Search for Meaning, which I'm sure you've read that book. And
my favorite.
And one of the things that Victor says in this book is that the greatest happiness and success ensues when you first pursue your your purpose. If you pursue happiness and success, you won't get them. But if you pursue your purpose, that's what will ensue. And I think Shake Shack is a great example of that. It just was not the least bit on our mind that this would do anything other than try to prove that hospitality works.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What a great, hospitality works. That is a great way to end that part of our program. Let's move it to Laura so she can open up with some Q&A. Thank you, Danny. And let's see what our audience has in mind.
Yes, we have a couple of questions here, but I'd like to start with who coined the term enlightened hospitality? Where did that come from?
I coined the term, and it's like so many other things that it was after a really, really low point in my life and in my career, actually. It was in 1995, and I had just opened Gramercy Tavern, my second restaurant, 10 years after Union Square Cafe. So I only had one restaurant for the first 10 years. And I had failed at the three things I had said I was going to do. One was, I'm only going to open a second restaurant if I think it can be at least as good as the first. And it really wasn't at that point. I'm only going to open a second restaurant if I think that in the process, the first one will actually get better. And Union Square Cafe actually took a little nosedive that year. And third, I'm only going to open a second restaurant if I think that my own life will come in a better balance in the process. Shambles, wasn't good. And something happened like a month after we opened Gramercy Tavern that sent me into a tizzy. I was so concerned. I had never had a second business, and I wanted everybody to love each one of them equally, which they didn't. And after a lunch one day, one of our guests came up to me and she said, you know, this restaurant's never going to make it. It's not nearly as friendly as Union Square Cafe. I said, what are you talking about? Tell me. She said, well, I just got done having a business lunch, and what happened never would have happened at Union Square Cafe. The salmon was overcooked. That has happened at Union Square Cafe, but you always handle it way, way better if that happens. The waiter didn't check in with me once. It was clear that I wasn't eating it. It was clear that it wasn't cooked the way I asked for it. He could see that with his eyes. And instead of what you would have done at Union Square Cafe, you would have subtly, without my guest seeing it, taken it away, offered to cook me another one. You would have brought me a salad or a cup of soup to enjoy while my guests were eating. You would have taken it off the bill. And I don't even care about that. But what your guy did here, he ignored me the whole time. He left it on my bill. He took it away and gave me a coat check so that the second half of it would be waiting for me in the coat room on my way out, which added insult to injury. And I was so mad when I heard that story that I realized that I had not ever learned as a leader up till that point how to do what we used to tell our kids, use your words. My leadership style with one restaurant was always showing by example, but now I had to be very explicit with how I wanted people to make decisions. And so I had an all staff meeting at Gramercy Tavern on a Saturday. And I said, here's what we're doing from now on. And that was the day that I said, hospitality, the way we make people feel, is paramount. You will be judged in this restaurant based on one thing. Did people leave here feeling better than however they came? And whatever you have to do, that you're not hearing rules. You got to figure out what it's going to take to make someone leave here happier than however they came. And I said, the first people you have to do that with is yourselves. Your first customer is yourselves. The way you treat each other, that's number one. Number two, how you treat our guests. Number three, how you treat our community. Four, how you treat our suppliers. And fifth, how you treat our investors. Because I think we'll make more money if you put investors fifth. And I think we'll have happier customers if you put them second to how you treat each other. But it was that day that I came up with the name of it, and I finally started saying, this is what we intend to do, not just what I intuitively know.
Thank you. So we have a question from Liz. The pandemic has shown that the restaurant business model was problematic, low margins, The question is, how do we predict what's going to happen as we move forward? Like, what's the new model? How are things going to change?
Things are going to change, Liz, in so many different ways. And you're absolutely right. One of my chefs said something so true. He said, you know, the restaurant industry itself is like an elderly a person with 3 different pre-existing conditions who gets COVID. We would have probably died anyway, but with COVID, this whole thing could just knock us out. And that's where we are right now. Amongst the problems in our industry, everybody knows that restaurants started off as kind of a weird idea, which is you're putting a manufacturing plant in the highest rent districts there are. You would never put, that's what a kitchen is. You take raw product and we take substantial amounts of square footage and we have a manufacturing plant, a showroom, expensive real estate that has only gotten higher and higher over time, especially in a place like Manhattan. And then we have this labor model, this talent model, where we only pay half of our talent because we have the American tipping system. And we expect our prices to represent all of our costs except for paying the people who bring you your food. And it's way, way out of whack. And what that has led to, it's actually been, depending on what sector of the restaurant industry, tipped employees can make up to 3 times as much as non-tipped employees. And the problem with that is that it has unwittingly perpetuated sexism and racism because of the distribution of white people and people of color. 60% of front of house workers who get tips are white. 70% of back of house tip workers who cannot share in tip pools by law are people of color. And it's the type of policy thing, the way we compensate or don't compensate people is a big problem. The American public learned in the last 15 to 20 years, and I'm really proud of what our industry has done. They learned to pay up for produce that was raised either organically or with respect for the earth. They learned to pay up for animal protein where the animals were responsibly raised. And it's absolutely incumbent upon our industry now to educate people, the consumer, that we've not been charging enough and you've not been paying enough. Now that you care about plants and animals, let's start caring about people. And that is absolutely what's next in our industry.
So we have a question here from Katie. What are some of the best transformations you've seen a restaurateur make during this pandemic? And if not a restaurateur, anyone in a leadership position?
Well, there's 2 categories. One has to do with the use of technology has been exciting and breathtaking. Using technology to keep people safer, using technology for contact tracing, using technology to prevent people from having to touch menus, i.e. QR codes, using technology to prevent people from having to give up their credit card and have that be touched by somebody. You know, we use technology in our restaurants, actually working with Clear, the company I mentioned, with a new product they have called Health Pass, so that our employees, when they come to work, check in. Clear provides the opportunity for our employees to know that the people they're working next to are healthy. That's a big deal. When we figure out how to do that as well as possible, because we just started piloting it, we're going to do that for our guests as well. It's got a built-in thermometer. It stores relevant contact tracing information. And so that kind of thing, I think, is not going to go backwards. I think that people are going to stop worrying about the pomp and circumstance in a restaurant. We've all had to pare our menus back because you can't have as many cooks cheek to jowl in the kitchen. But I think that's good. We've had to pare our wine list back, but I think that's good. I don't think it takes 800 selections on a wine list to find one that goes, with your pasta. I think people are way, way more interested in how we make them feel. The fact that people are in New York going out to restaurants that are literally in the street of New York. There's a restaurant in my neighborhood where everyone who goes there knows they're going to have a mouse tickling their toes, when they eat in the middle of the street. I'm not kidding. Not one of my places, but they go every night because they got to be with people. But that proves to me that all the money we've spent on these fancy decors and beautiful chairs, and no one cares. You can, if you put good food on the plate and good something in the glass, and you treat people like you're happy to see them and make them feel like they belong, that's the essence of why people go to restaurants. And I think you're going to see that pared back. The other thing you're going to see is that our industry, like so many, has, I think, used this period of time. Many in our industry have used this period of time to look in the mirror and say, why have we been so far behind when it comes to racial equity and justice? And you're going to see our industry take some major steps to lead the way. And I'm really excited about that, because we clearly have not done that enough in the past.
That's a really good ending to the next question, or segue. How do you think we can address the mental health and well-being of our hourly employees in the times we're currently living in?
That's probably the most important question that we will hear all day today. And it's, a lot of people say that's a great question when they know the answer. I say it's a great question when I don't. I think that stress, this question mark that we're all living under right now, which is, when is this damn thing going to be done? Throw in an election that is as contentious as any I can remember in my lifetime. And then you say to the people who work for you, and by the way, your job is to take care of other people and make other people feel good, when you may not know how to make yourself feel good right now. And I just think that it gets back to what I was answering when asked, how has my role changed through all these years? I've always thought that the great leaders have to be one part business person and one part emotional intelligence purveyor. And I just feel like I'm like 10% business person right now and 90% trying to really, as I said earlier, listen to understand, and really listen and try to put myself in other people's shoes. And I gave 2 talks to our team this week alone, just acknowledging the stress. And I know that stress is not sustainable. And sometimes it's just, as I say, it's just about listening. I'll be hosting coffees with Danny, no more than 8 people on a Zoom call. And we don't go with any business agenda. It's just me giving people a permission to feel their feelings, because if they don't, how in the world can I expect them to take care of other people's feelings? Because we can't run on empty. We all need to put our own oxygen mask on first.
Danny, you are a chief emotions officer.
Oh, I like that.
A CEO. Back to Laura with maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
So this one from Sean O'Connor. I'm not sure if it's the actor. Many restaurants in the Seattle area moved towards the service fee included model to move away from the tipping system. Most retreated from this within a year. How have you handled this in your restaurants?
It took us 5 years to retreat from it. We did it philosophically, I believe, for the right reasons, which is, as I said earlier, there was just every single year a growing gap between what a tipped employee could make and what a non-tipped employee could make. That's why we eliminated tipping. We called it hospitality included. Did it in about 15 of our restaurants over the course of 5 years. The guests came along with it, but the problem was that, as your question indicates, not enough other restaurants came along as well. And therefore, our menu pricing, which included everything, started to look more and more like an outlier competitively. And so as a result of that, in order to pay our team members enough so that they would feel better about life with no tipping, they felt better emotionally. They loved not having to serve your table, wondering if you think the only reason they're being nice to you is in expectation of a further reward in 2 hours. But they didn't like the fact that we could not charge enough to compensate them as well as they had been compensated with tips. Our cooks were making more money. That felt good. But in addition to not being able to pay our servers enough to equal what they were making with tips, our investors weren't happy because we just were not charging enough to do all the things we needed to do. So we retreated when we reopened after the quarantine. However, what we're now doing is, in addition to having restored tipping, we now also pay a revenue share to our non-tip eligible kitchen workers. And so we're trying a new model right now. Ultimately, the real answer is for, and this is a state law, state policymakers need to do what they've done in California, where there's a fantastic new model called Heart of the House, where tips can be shared amongst everybody. And so there's a restaurateur in south of San Francisco named Jessie Cool, and she has a fantastic restaurant called Flea Street. And her Heart of the House program has a line at the bottom of your guest check that says gratitude, because that's what a tip is. You should be saying thank you, but that thanks can go to everybody in the restaurant. And that's going to promote much more equity amongst workers.
Wow. I think we maybe need to just give our thanks to you. Unless, Laura, you think we have time for one more?
One more. We have
more, go.
one from a mute. What has been one of your favorite hospitality experiences? You personally.
Well, it always used to be going to my grandparents' house for Thanksgiving because they were on my side. I got all the food I could possibly eat, and I got to go sneak food in the kitchen, and people were happy to see me. I don't know. I'm fortunate. I've had so many great experiences. I'll give you one really cool one though, in a hotel that blew my mind. And Chip, you'll like this because this is how you think as well. I got to my hotel room. This was, I won't go into the specifics about which hotel and what city, but I was upgraded to a suite. That always feels good. That's thing number one. My suite had a desk, and on the desk was a desktop computer, which was perfect because I needed to get some work done back in New York. I put my books down on the table because I had homework to do. And as I put my books down on the table, I accidentally hit the mouse of the computer, which activated the screen. The screen of the computer was preset to the live Shack Cam, so I could actually see the line in Madison Square Park in real time, Shake Shack. And I go, geez, this is crazy. I get up out of that seat and I go to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, which was part of my upgrade, the kitchenette or whatever they call that, there was a copy of Setting the Table next to a copy of our cocktail book, which is called Mix, Shake, Stir. I go, this is crazy. I then look at the table, and on the table are all the fixings in the cocktail book. One of those cocktails is my favorite cocktail that I named after my father. All of the ingredients for that cocktail were now on the table. Okay, so now that's on night 3. It's the night before Father's Day, and I'm in trouble because I'm not going to get home for Father's Day, which you learn as a father is really for everyone else in the family. But I'm not going to get home for Father's Day till at least 5 that afternoon. So on my nightstand, right when I'm about to call for my 5 a.m. wake up call, so I can get out of town and get home because I'm out west. I pick up the phone. There's a picture this is a little creepy now. There's a framed picture of me with all of my family saying, "Happy Father's Day, Dad. We can't wait to see you." So these people got into my head, and right on the line of too much, but they were on my side.
Wow.
Did you make the cocktail? Did you make your favorite cocktail?
3 times.
Oh, yes, there you go. Oh, and our next happy hour, we'll talk more about alcoholism in the restaurant business. We shouldn't laugh about it.
No.
Danny, we love you. First of all, for those who want to give a donation, because as we all know, this happy hour is free to everybody. It's a free happy hour. And so each of our guests gives you some information about the organization that the nonprofit you could donate to. And in Danny's case, it is the Hugs Fund, HUGS, which was created by the Union Square Hospitality Group to support its employees who are facing unexpected and exceptional financial needs. So hugs have been a theme of this call. Huge hugs to you, Danny. David, I'll let you say something and then I'll tell you who's coming next.
I'm just blown away. Danny, your book is just it's like a Bible around here. And what you said about follow your purpose and you find your happiness. I just love that. It's great to have you. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Well, I love being with you guys, and thanks. I didn't get to see everybody else on this call, but thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Danny. And so who's coming in 2 weeks? 2 weeks from now will be 1 hour later, our normal time, 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm not going to give you his name. It is a he, but he's a musician, as we said, a humanitarian, a filmmaker, a social activist. He had a #1 hit this year in adult alternative music. He has a yoga resort in Bali, and that's where he and his wife will be calling from. It's called Soul Shine. I've known him for over 30 years. He and his wife had their wedding at my first hotel, the Phoenix, which is where he used to stay, which is where I met him long ago. And this guy will be joining us 2 weeks from now. Maybe we'll even convince him to play a song or two. We'll see. Danny, thanks again. Laura, David, it's an honor to be doing this every 2 weeks. We now have been doing it for gosh, we're over half a year at this point, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you 2 weeks from now.
Thanks,
Happy
Danny.
birthday, Chip.
Oh, and happy birthday, Chip.
Happy birthday.
2 days from now, Halloween.
Happy birthday, Chip.
The big 6-0.
Happy birthday,
Happy birthday, Chip.
Thank you, guys.